Hello, everyone. Welcome and welcome. Oh, we've got 93 people in the room already. Thank you for those who were here early and waiting for us. I'm Sherilyn Stevens, the moderator for the Racial Healing, Justice, and Unity series. And we're delighted to have you all here. New friends, friends that brought friends, folks that stumbled along and found us. We're very happy that you're here. And as always, I'm going to talk a little quicker today because our speaker is in the midst of a national meeting, but stepped away from that to spend time with us. Isn't that incredible? And so his time is limited. So we want to make best use of that. So I'll do a couple of things a lot faster than I normally would. First, a quick gratitude to our team, Nason and Jillian Sturdivant, who do our tech support, and Sharon Nesbitt-Davis, who does our devotions. We'd like to thank Dr. Robert C. Henderson for being here and taking that time away from his other duties. And we'd like to thank all of you for being here, because if you weren't here, we wouldn't be here. So thank you. Okay. Let's get started. We have an acknowledgement. Jillian, we're ready on the slides. We're doing a very quick acknowledgement for our Indigenous brothers and sisters, not only because of stolen land, but these are the people who everyone thinks do not exist any longer. And it's very important. We like to acknowledge their presence, their contributions to us, to this country, for eons, and we await their day in the sun along with the rest of us. So if you'd like to note in the chat your the stolen territory on which you're residing, please feel free to do so. The chat will be open until devotions, and then it will close until after the presentation. You will be able to chat with your host, however, during that time. Thank you. Jillian, can we go to our next slide, please? And this is to acknowledge notable Baha'i ancestors who stood up in the path of racial justice. Sadie Oglesby, Robert Turner, Enoch Olinga, Dr. Magdalene Carney, Elaine Locke, Dorothy Baker, William Sears, Pauline and Joseph Hanna, Rahia Canoe, Robert Hayden, Elsie Austin, Louis Gregory, Ellsworth Blackwell, Agnes Parsons, and of course, at the center of that, Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi.
Why so afraid to stand up? Someone will tell you, sit down. But here is the truth. Someone will always tell you, sit down. The ones we remember kept standing.
And during this time, if you'd have individuals that have departed that you would like to say a prayer for, acknowledge in the chat, please feel free to do so during the devotional portion.
God grant that the light of unity may envelop the whole earth, and that the seal, the kingdom is God's, may be stamped upon the brow of all its people.
Today, humanity is bowed down with trouble, sorrow, and grief. No one escapes. The world is wet with tears. But thank God, the remedy is at our doors. Let us turn our hearts away from the world of matter and live in the spiritual world. It alone can give us freedom. If we are hemmed in by difficulties, we have only to call upon God, and by his great mercy, we shall be helped. If sorrow and adversity visit us, let us turn our faces to the kingdom, and heavenly consolation will be outpoured. If we are sick and in distress, let us implore God's healing. and he will answer our prayer. Abdul Baha.
Nothing can dim the light which shines from within. Maya Angelou.
It sounds good to me. I know I've been changed. Angels, heaven. Listen, somebody walked up to me and asked me a question one day. They said, girlfriend, how in the world can a brown cow eating green grass gonna turn around and give us some white milk? I said, well, I don't know about that one. But one thing that I do know, that God's chemical laboratory of redemption took my black soul, stained with sin, and plunged me in red blood, the blood of Jesus. And I came out white as snow. Yes, I did. The angels in heaven done sign. Oh, my name.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sharon, for putting that together. And that was the fastest devotions and gratitudes and everything else we've ever done. We've set a new record, and we're just delighted to have all of you here today, truly. It's my privilege and pleasure to introduce Robert C. Henderson. However, I'm not going to read his resume or the summary. In our community, in our faith, position does not give you privilege. And Bob is the epitome of being a down-to-earth brother. And so on that note, that's the point from which he'd like to spend his time with us tonight. So with that, Dr. Henderson, I'm sorry, Bob, it's all yours.
Well, thank you. First of all, hello, everybody. I'm in a hotel in California. And so this is an odd experience for me because I've never done this outside my office. And so it's a little weird, but I'm delighted to be with all of you. And I want to make a couple of comments, Sherilyn, on the acknowledgement of the ancestors. And one of the scriptural readings that was presented in the beginning. First, we're going to talk a little bit about how humanity is bowed down with the weight of the world and with all of the turbulence and conflict that is occurring all over the world. But I want to say a couple of things about two of the images that I saw now. In most of the folks, not all of them, but most of the folks that you showed on that picture, I knew. And many of them were friends of mine. Now I was much younger and I looked up to them, but I knew them from the time that I was a child. And I want to tell two stories because I think those stories exemplify the very spirit of the reconstruction of the world that we're all about, that exemplify how we come together and how, as the sister sang, how we change in the eyes of the Lord. The first story I want to tell is about Bill Sears. Now, Bill Sears was the bald white man on the upper right-hand part of your screen. And he was smiling, and it was one of his camera shots. Bill Sears was a sportscaster on American television. And then he became famous for having a children's television show. But he was a great teacher of the Bahá'í Faith, and we all loved him. And I knew Bill Sears from the time I was a very small boy. But when the civil rights campaigns started in the 60s, Bill Sears was in South Africa teaching the Bahá'í Faith. He was building Bahá'í communities in a racially divided South Africa and was a champion of racial equality there then. And he flew back to the United States and called a big meeting of all the Bahá'ís. All of the white Bahá'ís and brown Bahá'ís and red Bahá'ís and yellow Bahá'ís, everybody came because everybody loved Bill. And my mother told me the story because it was so important to her spiritual life. She said Bill was known for being radiant and smiling all the time and loving everybody and sweet and very funny. And always with deep spiritual insight interwoven into his humor. But Bill stood on the stage behind the lectern and he looked sternly at the audience. And nobody could make sense out of why this man who was so loved and who loved us all so much was in such a stern mood. And Bill looked out at the audience and he pointed his finger and he said, "Where were you?" And nobody knew what he was talking about. He said, "Where were you?" He said, "When the first man fell in Selma, Alabama, in the civil rights marches, where were you? And why wasn't it you?" And Bill, in those early days, rose up to be a great champion of Baha'is getting directly involved in the forefront of the civil rights movement. It touched and transformed the heart of my mother, who'd been a Baha'i since she was 8 years old. And it was such a comfort for her to see at that time when some people were vacillating and some people were strong and active in the movement. But when Bill stood up and took that lead role and challenged everybody to change and to live the teachings of Baha'u'llah, which are teachings of the oneness and unity of all humankind, it really touched the souls of everybody that was there. And the other person that I wanted to just make mention of was my dear friend, Elsie Austin, because Elsie Austin was the daughter of a woman who was born in a small cabin in the wilds of Kentucky right after the Civil War. And when her grandmother was pregnant with her mother, her husband was running for his life from the Ku Klux Klan because he was running for office in that brief period of emancipation when a number of Black citizens were elected to be congressmen and local officials and the like. And the Klan was out to kill him, to keep him from running for office. And they burst into this small cabin in which this woman who was 8 months pregnant lay on her bed, and they demanded to know where her husband was. And she said, "You can kill me, but I'm not going to tell you." They didn't. She bore the child, and that child was the mother of Elsie Austin. Elsie Austin became one of the greatest women in American history. She was the first woman to be a state's attorney in the history of the United States. And she was the first Black person to be a state's attorney in the history of the United States. She was a great Baha'i, and she built as a legislative ambassador to the country of Nigeria. She was the person who established the Nigerian Supreme Court. And I had the privilege of going with her much later in her life in Lagos, Nigeria, to visit the Chief Justice of the Nigerian Supreme Court. Now, Elsie Austin was microscopic. She was tiny. On a good day with heels, Elsie was 4'10", maybe 4'11". Absolutely beautiful. And even late in her life, she was stunningly beautiful. And the Chief Justice of the Nigerian Supreme Court was a good 6'5" and weighed as close to 300 pounds as you could weigh. I mean, he was a huge man. And when he saw the great Dr. Elsie Austin at the door, I swear to you that he was 4'10" and she was 6'5". He held her in that great esteem. But in both of these cases, these people from humble beginnings, first Bill Sears and then Elsie Austin, took the word of God to their hearts, and they were changed, they were transformed, and they led a life of faith that had a transformational effect, not only on their own hearts and their own lives, but on everybody who knew them, on the social institutions that they built and served, on the communities that they were a part of. These were legendary people, and I am just so proud to have even known them from a distance, let alone up close. And so I just wanted to say a couple of words because I was so touched when I saw those pictures, and frankly, I could go on and on about the various images that you had on the screen, but I just wanted to say a word about those two. Now, to our comments tonight, and I'll try to not go on ad infinitum so that we can have some questions and comments from everybody who's participating. But I wanted to take a look at the larger picture of the plan of God for the unification of humanity and for the establishment of what the Bible calls the kingdom of heaven on earth. And I wanted to take a look back at the historical documents that guide our understanding of God's purpose for man, and then walk into the future and talk about where we are now and what America and the world is dealing with and how we confront the challenges we face and how we might ourselves be changed and contribute to the change we all want to see in the world at large. I want us to remember that the Lord said that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And by that, we understand that the Word was made manifest in the messengers of God, Abraham and Moses, and Christ, Buddha and Krishna, Mohammed, and now the Bab, the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah himself, but that all of them carried one unifying message. That was the fatherhood of God who created us and the family of humanity. And the Bible explains to us that we are going to go through a vast spiritual, social, political, historical evolution, that our road will be thorny and tortuous, replete with setbacks and reverses, that we will make all manner of mistakes and errors and sins, and we'll have all kinds of shortcomings. But in the end, we will progress through the jungle of our own incomplete understandings to become those spiritual beings that God so loved that he created. And so the Bible goes on to tell us that there will come a time when the Father will come, and that time will come in a period of intense confusion and frustration and hardship for humanity, where the lights of truth and confidence and justice have been blotted out, where conflict was everywhere, and where people saw not solutions, but just the den of constant arguing and fighting and betrayal and injustice and inequality. And he said that in that time, the Comforter will come, and it will be the dawning of a new day. It'll be the very beginning of a transformational change in the condition of humanity on a world scale. And that transformational change will have certain characteristics. For example, the Bible tells us that at that time, God will write his law on the inner tablets of our hearts, and he will stamp his name on our foreheads. They said that we will see his face and we will be with him every day. And by that, we understand that we will have a transformation of our hearts, and that our hearts will come into compliance with the law of God, which has always been the law of love, the law of unity, the law of understanding and cooperation, the law of justice and equality. And that his name will be stamped on our foreheads reminds us that we will think differently, that our habits of thought, our habits of the heart, and our habits of behavior will be the habits that instill unity and love and understanding and cooperation among all of us. They say that the lion will lay with the lamb. And by that, we understand that he's not talking about a transformation of animals. He's talking about the diverse characteristics of human beings, and that those who had been predators on the innocent will have a change of heart and mind, and will be in unity and cooperation with others who had been formerly victimized by their predation. And so these were the promises of the Bible. And one sees in these promises the love of God, because he says, you know, you're young, you're disorganized, you're unknowledgeable, and you're unable. And so you cannot have the kingdom of heaven on earth at this young stage, but in the vast expanse of history, you will grow, you will learn, you will build civilizations that are progressively more unified. And this day, we believe, as the world is contracting into a neighborhood, and as humanity is in touch with each other, and as we discover to a greater and greater extent that the well-being of anyone is connected to the well-being of everyone. What did Martin Luther King say? He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, that we are all tied together in a single garment of destiny, that what affects one directly affects everyone indirectly. Well, Baha'is believe that all of those messengers have been agents of our spiritual, social, political, and economic transformation, that they have all given rise to civilizations that brought us greater knowledge about who we are, about our relationship to one another, and about our relationship to God and to our own souls and spiritual developments. And further, we believe that His Holiness Baha'u'llah has brought us a revelation that unifies our understanding of all of the prophets of the past, that explains to us their spiritual relationship, and that also explains in ways that we can understand that those differences that separate our religions aren't differences at all. They were simply practical accommodations to the time. Don't eat pork because it'll kill you. It's not, without refrigerators, that's a problem. But the spiritual foundation on which all of those revelations rested was a common foundation. And so we believe, as Baha'u'llah has taught, that this is the dawning of the age of what he calls the most great peace, or translated in biblical terms, the beginning of the construction of the kingdom of heaven on earth. And I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are and how we might see our present circumstances and what that might mean for the way that we go forward. And I'm going to draw a little bit from our current political and social condition. And then I'm going to apply some of the Baha'i understandings about how we deal with those challenges that face us all. I want to go back to 2020 and January 6th, when we were all horrified on the day that Congress was to certify the election of a new American president, that the capital of our country was stormed by over 1,000 people who not only breached the Capitol and brought destruction and fear to everyone in it, but it also resulted in the death of a number of people. And I want to go to 4 studies that were done by the University of Chicago Center for the Study of Security and Threats. They look at threats to established governments on a global scale. And in this case, they were looking at the threat to American democracy as a result of the January 6th uprising. And they did 4 studies in conjunction with the Brookings Institution. And here's what they wanted to know. They wanted to understand, among the 800 people they were able to interview, and these were 800 people who had been apprehended either immediately or later by photo image and identification. Why did you do it? What was motivating you to breach the Capitol? I mean, other people have been disappointed by the outcome of elections in the past, but they haven't tried to burn down the government and perpetrate a coup d'etat and overthrow that government because of their dissatisfaction. And interestingly, we learned some interesting things. First of all, of the roughly 1,000 people that were arrested, only 7% of those people were poor. Most of those people were very well-educated people. They were CEOs, they were engineers, they were doctors, they were lawyers, they were professional people. And second, that most of them came from what we call politically blue states and not red states. And so the question of why did you do this? Was a very interesting question to ask. And 93% of them had the same answer. They said that our primary motivation was what they called the Great Replacement. And that Great Replacement was the day that they anticipate that the number of people of color in the United States would be greater than the number of white people in the United States. And their fear that they would lose their social influence, their political power, their access to wealth, and the like. And that was the primary motivation for storming the Capitol and trying to overthrow the government. Well, when we look around the world, one of the things we see is that this is a common anxiety in many developed countries. What's happening is there is a global migration of people from all corners of the world to other parts of the world. Some of it is a result of climate change. Some of it is the result of economic disruption. Some of it is the direct result of oppressive government tactics, violence and abuse of civil rights and human rights. But the net effect is that there is a global integration occurring everywhere, and it is being welcomed by some and inspiring fear and reaction by others. And so all of the world, we're seeing two processes. One is a process of the rise of populism and nationalism, and a rise of ultra-conservative, racially based rejection of those people who are seeking sanctuary in their nations, or people who are trying to get jobs, trying to establish family life, and so on, in communities that had formerly been dominated by the native residents of that country. And so we see this all over the world, and what comes along with it is a rising tide of populist leadership. And these are people who are saying, you know, that this country is for our people and not for other people, and that they don't belong here and that they should not be here. And so you have that as one of the rallying cries all over the United States, all over the world. And in the United States, you can turn on the television, you can turn on YouTube, you can go on social media, and you will hear the very same thing. Now, at the same time, there is another process in play that gets very little attention, but is one that is more important than the rejection of the integration and globalization of world population life. And that is that this is the most prosperous time in human history. And it is the least violent time in human history. And it is the first time in human history that humanity from all corners of the world have taken on transformational change projects. And I'll give you examples of all the things that I've mentioned. First of all, I said that this is the most prosperous time in human history. If you go back 40 years, 85% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. That is, no health care, no guaranteed job or income, no stable material life. And as a result, extreme poverty breeds disease, it breeds ignorance, it breeds conflict, it breeds hardship of every kind. 85% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty just a few short decades ago, within our lifetimes. Today, that number is 9%. 9%. That is an overwhelming transformation of the condition of humanity. And what's happened is that 74% of that population has moved into the global working class. And it has brought all kinds of wonderful changes that are benefiting everyone in many ways. First of all, economically, because they're working and producing money, it is enriching the countries in which they live. And it's doing so on a scale that humanity has never seen before. And so what are some of the other changes that come along with this? Well, during that same period, there has been a 74% decrease in infant mortality. Kids live. And the reason that they're living is that they've got access to medical care because their parents are producing money. At the same time, 40, 50 years ago, the average woman in a developing country had about 5.5 children. Today, it's 2.5 children, which means that global overpopulation is no longer an imminent threat to the stability and the security of humanity. And if you go back to that same period, just the 80s till now, in those days, about the average woman in a developing country had 0 education, and the average man, perhaps first grade, maybe second grade. Today, in those same countries, the average woman has a 9th grade education and the average man a 10th grade education. And globally, 64% of the people in colleges and universities in the United States and throughout the world are women for the first time in human history. So you look at these trends and you see that the capacity of humanity to work together to better conditions for everyone has risen at an unprecedented speed and to an unprecedented degree. Now, let me give you one other example. You take the issue of climate change, which threatens us all. Very, very few people know that if you look, at the continent of Africa, right across the fat part of the middle, at the bottom of the perimeter of the Sahara Desert, which goes from east to west across the country, 23 African nations are building what they call the Great Green Wall. And this is a 30-mile thick forest of trees that'll go from the east coast of the Sahara Desert to the west coast of the Sahara Desert and produce water and oxygen and mitigate climate change and produce good climate and so on. And it'll stop the spread of the Sahara Desert, but it'll also be the largest living organism on the planet and will contribute to the mitigation of climate change. Now, this is being done by 23 nations that were formerly nations mostly in concept. They were more confederations of tribes than they were nation states as we have experienced a nation. But what's happening as a result of this process is that those nations are consolidating a national identity, and they are working in collaboration with other nations in order to complete the Great Green Wall. And I'm happy to tell you that a great deal of that 30-mile buffer of forest is done. Now, what else is it producing besides beneficial effects on our climate? Well, it's producing jobs, and it's producing water systems, and it's producing electrical grids, and it's producing highways, and all of the tools that communities need in order to lift the level of life and the quality of life for everyone. So you see, there are two processes at work here. There is fear and anxiety and rejection of global integration on one side, giving rise to nationalism and populism. But on the other side, there is this rise of the social, economic, and political condition of the vast numbers of people in the world, and it's happening right under our noses. And they are doing things that are going to affect the life of everybody who lives forevermore. Now, I also said that is the least violent time in human history. And, you know, there are books about this, notably perhaps the most famous, is a book by a Harvard social psychologist named Steven Pinker, and it's called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And the book is about that thick. It's 942 pages. And what he says at the outset is that he apologizes for how big the book is. But he says, I had to make it big because you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. And he explains how all this social transformation in the economic condition, in the health, in the social uprising, in the rise of education and the like, has given rise to a global increase in civil society, people working together under the rule of law. And as a result of the progress of that effort, this is by measure the least violent time in the history of humanity. So let me give you an example. The way violence in a society is measured is the number of violent deaths per 100,000 people in the society. And a good yardstick for understanding how that measure works is World War II. So in World War II, there were about 600 violent deaths per 100,000 people in the society. Today, it's 0.03. 0.03. That's the kind of, and everything is down. Murder is down, abuse is down, mob violence is down. There is no kind of violence that you can talk about that has not declined precipitously. Now, obviously, this can change, and obviously it is dynamic. But the trends here are trends in the reconstruction of social and spiritual life. Right? So I just wanted to give you that perspective, first from the biblical view of what's going to happen to humanity and why and what it would lead to. And then I wanted to give you some practical examples because, you know, often when we talk about this, when we talk about the change we want, we're hoping in our hearts that this is really possible and doable. But what I'm arguing here is that it's happening. It's not only possible and doable, but there are transformational changes taking place in the body of humanity that human life on this planet has never seen before. So let's talk about some of the things that the Bahá'í Faith says about the accelerants of that process. The Bahá'í Faith teaches that America has a special role to play in the establishment of international peace and in the establishment of the oneness and unity of the human family. You may recall that at the founding of America, the founding fathers said that we have it in our power to begin the world all over again. They said the past was the textbook of tyranny, but the future is the Bible of the free. Great thinkers like Ralph Waldo Emerson said that if you spill one drop of American blood, you've spilled the blood of the entire world, because this nation was built of all people from all places. The Baha'i writings teach that the nation has a special role to play in the establishment of freedom and democracy, unity and understanding on a global scale, because it is a nation that aspires to freedom under law, to democratic rule, to equality, and so on. Now, we know that we have walked a very long and torturous journey from the enslavement of Black Africans to Jim Crow, to second-class citizen, to a contemporary process where it seems like every step of progress made toward racial equality and toward righting the historical wrongs of the past is followed by a backstep So we get the Historical Voting Rights Act, and then all of a sudden we want to chip away at it so that we diminish the possibilities for people of color to vote, and so on and so forth. But let's talk about what the Baha'i Faith teaches in terms of the role of the unity of the races and its relationship to the destiny of America and the role that America is to play in the establishment of global unity. The Baha'i Faith teaches that freedom from racial prejudice is the hallmark of a true Baha'i character and the supreme injunction of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. They say that the unity of humankind. Let's see, am I still here? My screen has gone blank.
You're still here, Bob. You're still here and we can see you.
All right, let's see if I can make an adjustment here that'll.
I can't see you. Oh, now.
You cannot.
Now can.
Now we can.
Okay.
Yeah, everything disappeared suddenly, and I didn't know what was going on. In any case, let me put this in a context that'll be easy to understand. In the beginning of the turn of the 20th century, when Black migration began, there were a series of race wars in 37 cities in the United States. They were called the Red Summers. And they were wars because white workers were concerned that Black workers would take their places. And so there was literally attacks and warfare in all these cities around the country. The Baha'is were asked by the head of the faith, then Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, to begin the first race amity movement and to bring Black people and white people together. And he explained that this would be the beginning of the organization of a new kind of community. Now, as this progressed, the leadership of the Baha'i Faith has continued to stress the essential importance of this task and what it would lead to. And what the Baha'i writings say is that we shouldn't just come together at conferences and parties and official occasions and so forth, but that we should integrate every phase of our lives. They say in our business practices, when our children are at play, in our time of leisure, in our homes, at our kitchen tables, in every aspect of life, we've got to seek an intentional development of friendship, understanding, cooperation, love, a sense of shared belonging to the same human family. Our writings say, the Baha'i writings say that this is so important that the flow of divine love and assistance from God himself to us is dependent on our persistence on this case. And they promise, our writings promise, that as we build these systems of unity, as we become champions of unity, the way that I described a white sportscaster, our dear Bill Sears, standing up and saying we should be in the front line at Selma, Alabama, and if anybody is beaten or hosed or killed, it should be one of us. That is the kind of life that we aspire to. That kind of heroic championship of the unity of humankind. So what are Baha'is doing now in order to advance that process? Right now, Baha'is are in a series of organized plans. These are global plans in which the head of the Baha'i Faith, the international governing body of the Baha'i Faith, has given us a vision for the next stage of the development of the Baha'i faith on a global scale. And all of the Baha'i communities in 205 different nations around the world are looking at that 9-year plan and beginning to ask themselves, what do we do specifically in our place so that we can advance these purposes? Now, these purposes are to uplift the general condition of humanity, to bring light, understanding, and the beginnings of cooperation and unity to adversarial groups, whether that adversary be on race or class or whatever it is, to help people become the champions of their own advancement, to affect both the social environment, the material condition, and the spiritual condition of our societies, and to build communities that reflect that, so that society itself might be affected and transformed by a different kind of community, a different kind of understanding. Central to that activity are what Baha'is call activities that are core. And by that they mean starting with little kids, children's classes. In the old days, we called it Sunday school, but now it might occur on any day of the week. But it is to help children understand that their physical and social reality are only two components of their lives, that their spiritual reality and their ability to affect themselves, their families, and their communities is great and virtually unlimited. We work with junior youth at their level of development, same thing, with youth, with families, with elders. So let me give you an example of what this looks like. I was in the small living room of an 80-year-old white Baha'i who lived in Florence, South Carolina, in a Black neighborhood. And she had a junior youth group of about 15, 16 kids. And these kids were all 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, and just young kids. And they were studying together and learning to pray. And what they were studying were all the religions, so that they would understand that all these religions are united in spiritual truth and have the same aims and points. And they were studying the teachings of the Baha'i faith. But more than that, they were invited to put these things into action. So I asked the kids, who are you and what do you do? And, what are you thinking about? And the kids would talk about things like they had decided that their little group was going to take care of all the older Black women in the neighborhood who were too old to keep their yards or to care for their houses. So they didn't announce it to anybody, not even the people whose houses they affect, but they went around picking weeds and mowing lawns and straightening up things and so on, because they said, this is what we can do to make life better for people who are losing their capacity to be physically active. What was important to me was that these kids had a sense of power and agency, and they were beginning to think about not just my happiness and what I want to do that's fun, but how can I make our community better? And what is within my power to do that would be an improvement or a comfort for somebody else? So I was talking to some of the kids and I said, well, how are you thinking about your own life? What do you want to do with your life? And one of the cutest responses was from the skinny little kid who was 12 years old. And he says, talking a mile a minute, he said, I used to want to be a lawyer, because lawyers are in charge of everything. Lawyers are the boss of everybody, and wherever you go, there's always a lawyer in charge. And so I figured I could be happy and I could be rich and I could be powerful if I was a lawyer. He said, but since I joined this junior youth group, I've decided that what I want to be is a second grade math teacher. I said, well, what, a second grade math teacher? Why that? He said, because if I can convince little 7-year-old kids that they're smart, it'll change their lives. And I thought to myself, show me a group of 12-year-old boys in any neighborhood, going to any school, who are thinking like this, who are seeing themselves as agents, not just of transformation, but of upliftment for other people. And that is exactly what the Baha'i Faith is about. It's about inspiring a sense of mission in which we join forces with everybody to help make everybody's life better, in concert with those spiritual teachings and that spiritual vision that God gave us at the time of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that vision that we would establish the kingdom of heaven on earth, which would be a transformation of our hearts in compliance with the laws of God, and a change in the way we thought about who we are, what our mission in life is, how we relate to other people, and how we organize our lives to serve the betterment of ourselves and our families and our communities and our world, and to begin to think outside ourselves. So here you have a 12-year-old kid at a time when most 12-year-olds are preoccupied with social media and aspire to be influencers. And the influence he wants to have is not the influence of power of an attorney who's in charge of everything, but the influence of a second grade math teacher who can inspire a little Black child to think, I'm smart and I can solve these problems. And if I can solve these problems, I can learn and I can become anything I want to be. So I don't, I could go on and on because there are so many fun stories to tell. But I wanted to just step back and take a look at the overview of these transformational changes that are happening in the world, and give you just a couple of examples of how the rubber meets the road, how kids change, how adults change, and so forth. To complete the picture of this little living room. All these Black kids are in this tiny little living room in a poor community in Florence, South Carolina. And the woman who owns the house is probably 79, 80 years old. And she's sitting on the sofa. She hasn't said a word. And she's made some lemonade. She put some potato chips out and some cookies and the like. But the kids felt like they were home, and it was clear. They were running around serving everybody and cleaning up afterwards and getting things organized and showing little skits that they had done and so on. And it was clear that there was love there and there was trust there. And it was such a contradiction to all of the stories of conflict and misunderstanding and you don't get it and and so on that we hear routinely. And here's this senior white woman, alone, widowed, and all these kids who love her. And she had a look on her face of contentment and pleasure that would have touched your heart and brought your eyes to tears. And the kids had looks on their face of, this is our place, and we have a mission, and we're doing our mission, and we're figuring stuff out, and we're taking action, and we're going to make things better for everybody. So, as my good friend, one of my good friends says, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And if you all have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was just wonderful. Okay, folks, it's your turn now. Please raise your chat hand and I'll call on folks. If you have comments, if you care not to speak out but would like to share a comment in the chat, please do that and I'll be happy to read it for you. Colette, I saw you had your hand up.
Actually, I was just applauding, but
Oh,
since
okay.
you called on me, Thank you so much, Bob, for a wonderful message of hope for the future, because there's a lot of gloom and doom around. And it's gratifying to hear how Baha'is all over the world are picking up on doing what they can in their own neighborhoods, and not being overwhelmed, as I think I was at one point, by some of the messages from our Universal House of Justice that were so big that, how could you possibly start doing anything? And for this 9-year plan, as we move forward, it seems that the message is, look around you. What can you do in your own backyard? And how do you work with others to achieve that? I'm really excited because locally, to me, we have an initiative going on that is not from the Baha'i community, but is inviting the Baha'i participation on the Gallup Well-Being Index. And how do you create a community of well-being working hand in hand with each other and seeing the equality of all the participants with no one taking ownership over and lording it over the others.
Colette, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I was going to say was that, to your point about sometimes being downhearted by the events of the world and what's on the news and so on, there is a passage in that 9-year plan that I referred to, a letter from the International Governing Body of the Bahá'í Faith, that says that we learn to look to the future with confidence. And when I think about the 12-year-old boy that I told you about in South Carolina, that is exactly what he was doing. He's got all kinds of hardships. He's got the hardship of limited means. He's got the hardship of low expectations. He's got the hardship of political disenfranchisement and so on and so forth. But he's not thinking about that. What he's thinking about is, I'm going to be a 2nd grade math teacher and I'm going to make kids smart and powerful, and they're going to change their lives. But more than that, if you look at a failed state like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and you look at all of the Baha'is working with people in the DRC to build schools, to build birthing clinics, to build water systems, to improve the condition of life, and to build understanding that would be the cause of the rise of unity and cooperation under the worst possible circumstances. I think that's what we've got to fix on. And what I wanted to suggest to you is that these processes are in motion. And what we can do is infuse them with spiritual certainty and an undying commitment of partnership.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Colette.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Okay, friends, Nason's going to open the chat. If you have a comment, we ask you not to go in exchanges back and forth with each other during the chat or in the chat, but rather if you have something you'd like to share in writing to Bob or a question you would like us to ask on your behalf. So let's go to Sandra and then Michael. And again, the preference is if you have a comment, put your hand up. Sandra, good to see you again.
It's good to see you, and it's good to see Dr. Henderson. I call you Dr. Henderson. Thank you for being here, and thank you for such a wonderful, positive message. I can't add much to what Colette said. Just know that we are in the community, I believe, and outside of the community, working to try to go ahead and improve conditions here in this country anyway. So thank you so much. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Well, it is my pleasure and delighted to see you. So happy you could join us.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Sandra. Michael Hampton, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Hey, Michael.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Dr. Bob. You know, I've had the privilege of knowing Bob for a long time. And I will tell you, this may be your finest talk. And certainly, I'm just going to ask, how do we get to be able to access this? Because as I've aged, I think I need to have repetition, and I may need to listen to this multiple times. But the
Sure.
content is really, really timely. And I really am honored that I get to hear this at least this once, but I'd love to know how to go about hearing the recording.
Well, Michael, you're right. You know, we've been friends for a very long time, and it's really good to see your face.
Thank you, man.
And we will not deprive you, Michael. You can watch this recording as many times as you want from our YouTube channel. I'm going to do my best to get it up within a week. YouTube is awfully slow in loading and take a whole day just to load it.
Yeah.
But it will be there. And you're here because you've signed up for the series for event notifications. So you'll get a notification when that recording is up. And you can also subscribe, of course, to the YouTube channel too. And Nason, if perhaps you could put that link in the chat as well for people that would like to save it now and go and visit the other phenomenal talks there. Thank you for the question, Michael.
Yeah, they're all good.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Everyone has something
Exactly.
special. Rennie and Dave. Is it Rennie or Dave today?
Well, it's Dave specifically. I'm sure Rennie's got lots of comments. This is such a wonderful talk, just so loaded with such important information. But I have a historical inquiry. I've been doing a lot of research on Bayard Rustin, one of the very unsung heroes of the whole civil rights movement, for reasons that I don't need to go into. But I've been reading biographies, and it mentioned that one of his great resources, a person that he went to many times in his early days and continuously, was Alan Locke.
Mm-hmm.
And
Alain Locke, yeah.
I wonder if you were ever able to talk to Alan or Bayard Rustin, if you know
Alain Locke
anything about his relation
before
to
my time. But I want to point out something important that you mentioned, Dave, and that is one of the points that I made is that Baha'is are not self-concerned. Baha'is are concerned about the well-being of everybody. And Baha'is want to be in partnership to make a better world with anybody who wants to do that, and everybody who wants to do that. So you'll find throughout the ages, whether it's Bayard Rustin and Alain Locke or so many others, that the Baha'i Faith and individual Baha'is have been sometimes invisible, sometimes visible partners in helping them along because of their interest in making the world better for everybody. So I'm not surprised to hear this story. I vaguely recall something along those lines, but I have, that's a distant memory for me.
Thank you very much. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Just thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave and Rennie. Louis Anderson, how are you? Louis, so good to see you.
I'm good, and thank you so much, Robert, for your
Lois,
talk.
it's been a long time since I've seen you. You look great.
Yeah, we won't go into that, but I know I have so many stories.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you, Louis, that blue sweater is working for you.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful color, man, and it looks great on you.
Just yelling out at everyone. Okay. Listen, I'm trying to reduce the questions. The first one is the research that you spoke of in the beginning. I really appreciate that. And I didn't catch it, whether you were a part of the research team
No. I just read the study.
Okay, I didn't catch that, but because I know, I've seen your resume and I can understand why we say we don't want to read it. It's long, but I appreciated it. Because some of it I knew and some of it I didn't. Because we talked many years ago, sitting at the airport in Chicago when waiting for our kids to come back from Brazil. You
Yep,
told me a
that's
little
right.
bit
That's
about
right.
stuff from Africa, the work that was going on. And so I appreciated knowing more about that, but we don't have to do that now. But the question I have is understanding the struggle that Baha'is are having in the community in terms of our own community development in terms of race relations. And then trying to follow the 9-year plan and putting African Americans and Native Americans in the forefront. The struggle between those two, one can hold the other back. And I'm not one of those, as you know me, to be held back. And so what suggestions do you have when you have an LSA that's really supportive of being in the forefront, teaching African Americans being in the forefront, that struggle to move forward regardless of the growth or the problems that you have? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I do. My comment is more of a way of looking at things that has been helpful to me. And I'll just share what it was. Maybe it is easier to explain as an event in my life a long time ago. I came home from work one day, and my oldest daughter, who's now a doctor of this and that, and she's quite impressive. But at that time, she was a toddler. She was just beginning to walk. And she had, I came in the house, and she had legs that looked like Bep the Michelin Man, just, little rolls of fat the way babies have on their legs. And she had a diaper that was fully loaded and halfway down to her knees, and you could smell it from the front door. And she had on one of those little baby t-shirts that come with apple juice stains all over the front. And she saw me, and she went into a big smile, and she had a tooth, and just, it was a mess. And so she got up, and she started to show me her walking. And of course, this was new, and it was the first time I had seen it, and I was excited. And she took about a step and a half before she face planted, and it just right on her face. And then she looked up at me, and sometimes as a parent, you know what to do, and sometimes you're just lucky and you do the right thing. And in this case, I was lucky and I did the right thing. And what I did was I said, "Oh, babe, that was so good. Ooh, do it again." And so instead of starting to cry, she smiled and got up and did it again. Now, here's my point. My point is that as I was thinking about her then, what I was thinking about was what she would become. Now, she had the stinky diaper and the dirty t-shirt, and she can kind of, but I'm thinking that those legs are going to grow and they're going to be beautiful, and she's going to be wonderful, and she's going to do special things. And I think that, so you don't blame her for her incapacity today. You cultivate the kind of relationship that can assure that she becomes capable, elegant, and beautiful and impactful in the future. We all start where we are, with all of our imperfections and all of our inconsistencies and all of our mistakes. But what we have in common is the agreement that we're going to work on this in a social and spiritual and practical way. And it's going to be lumpy. Now, the way that the Baha'i writings describe this is they say that our destiny is going to be the envy of posterity. People will look back and they say, "Man, I wish I was those guys." They said, but the writings say that our path will be thorny and torturous, replete with setbacks and reverses. And so basically what the Baha'i writings are saying is, look, it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult, and it is not always going to be pleasant, and it will sometimes fill your heart with dread and sorrow. But that's the path you've got to walk in order to get the outcome we want, which is the benefit for everyone. So part of what I've done with myself is I have remembered that image of my baby on that day. And I see her now, and she is a master of the universe, and she's a doctor, this and that, and she's done all these incredible things, and she's beautiful and so on. But we had to go through that stage and many others that were difficult and challenging to get to a point where she could flourish as an impactful woman with a spiritual vision. Well, if that is the path for our kids, just imagine how much more challenging it is for a community that comes together in all this diversity voluntarily with all kinds of good hopes, but incomplete information and understandings. And we try to do something really hard that has never been done before. So, what I'm saying is, yeah, it's tough. Well, that makes sense. It is tough, but the promise of the Baha'i writings is that the hardship we are willing to bear will not only be transformational for our hearts and our lives, but will be transformational for everybody else. And that's why we bear that brunt. That's why we carry that weight. And that's why you and I send our kids to Brazil to meet those kids down there and living in the favelas in the poorest part of the city and coming back different than they were when they left.
Right. Right. Well, I can appreciate that. I kind of knew the answer, but I was hearing echoes of Bill Sears.
Yeah, it's hard out there.
You know, why
hard.
weren't you there on the bridge? You know,
Yeah, it's hard, man.
It is.
And Bill, think about who Bill was talking to. He was talking to a predominantly white community that had come out of the 40s and 50s with a very different social understanding and a very different vision of what society was supposed to be and who they were in society. And he was setting up a brand new expectation for them to get involved in a struggle that, that most of them had not been reared to engage. So this is a hard process. But one of the reasons that I gave the overview to say, look, this is what's happening in the world with prosperity, with education, with health, with climate, with violence, and it's all going in the direction that the Bible forecasts and that the Baha'i writings talk about specifically, was to say God keeps his promises, and the question is, will we keep ours?
Yeah, you got that right. Thank you so much. I know we could talk for hours, and I want you to keep in mind, we may call you to talk to Kansas City.
All right.
We need a smackdown.
Yeah. All right.
We need a smackdown, and you can do it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Allow.
Thank you, Louis. So good to see you again. Just a real quick reminder, if you have a question, raise your hand. There's no question that is too small or too big for Bob Henderson.
Yeah. I think the too big was an exaggeration. The too small was about right.
He's got a good sense of humor. Okay, and so I'm also going to ask
Sherilyn,
you,
I've done this before.
I know.
The deal.
How's your time running, Bob? Because we got a few people here in the queue, so let's
I've got
check
a little
on
bit
that.
more time.
About how much more, roughly?
Let's see. I think we're about 15 more minutes with that.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So the folks in the queue, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to ask you to please make your comments or questions concise. Bob will get the chat. All of you have been sending me messages and compliments to him and his presentation. He'll get that information if we don't have time to share it and read it tonight. Okay, Elizabeth Ellis. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Sherilyn. I just had a question about, in your experience, I mean, because you've been involved in consultation for a very long time. I mean, I've been a Baha'i for a while, but not as much in an institutional level of experience. And I've wondered what in your experience seems to have been some of the most important elements of opening up, talking about the implications of race in the planning of Baha'i activities in a community. I mean, within the framework of action. I mean, we live in our situation is a little different than some places, but it seems to be difficult, or in my experience, it's not real often that you actually hear people say, well, let's see, what's the implications of race within the decision we're trying to make, or the realities we're looking at. Does that make sense as a question?
Sure. Elizabeth, I want to say something that might strike you as indirectly related, but I think it's directly related.
Okay.
I want to suggest to you that the fundamental principles of the Baha'i Faith are the key to navigating complex issues and resolving them. And I want to use an example.
Okay.
The first example that I want to use is independent investigation of truth. Assuming that all of us are smarter than any one of us, and that collecting information from everyone builds the aggregate wisdom and intelligence of the entire group. So if we're talking together, then I'm getting smarter because I've got the benefit of more complex things. Now, in the context of racial diversity, I'll give you an example of how this works.
Okay.
Many studies have shown that diverse groups that operate in a consultation mode solve problems better than experts in their own area of expert knowledge.
Okay.
And she said, well, why is that? How could that be? Well, it's because nothing's off the table for them. They'll think about anything, maybe this, maybe that. And here's an interesting thing, Elizabeth. The harder the problem, the better they do. So it suggests to us that if we're willing to open our hearts and to open our minds and to become outstanding listeners. Now, you know, I'm on the Baha'i National Assembly, and they meet for days at a time. And no matter how much you talk, you're going to listen 95% more than you talk, because that's just the way any group is. So becoming a sincere listener and beginning to reflect on what people are really saying with their hearts. What's the real intent of their comment? And how might we better understand what they're trying to tell us and what we can do with that information? And when it comes to issues of race, how can we approach that question in a way that fully humanizes and enfranchises the populations that we're talking about? For example, it's one thing to ask, well, how does this work in a racial context? And that's a legitimate question. It's another thing to ask, how's this going to help so-and-so and so-and-so and
Yeah.
so-and-so?
One specific, real people.
And how can this help these kids in this neighborhood? And how can they help this family? And are we thinking about their particular needs? Because this isn't about the crafting of policy. This is about helping people live better lives. And if we're preoccupied with how they're understanding things, what they're experiencing, and what they're going through, then it's going to be easier for us to come to conclusions that are truly beneficial and uplifting. And now I could go on for a while about the neuroscientific effects on the brain when you do that, but I'm going to shortcut it and say they're all good. You get smarter, you get more incisive, you get more compassionate, you get happier. It is all good. So I would just encourage you to begin to think about those fundamental principles, not just as guidelines for life, but as keys to the essence of what it means to be an effective human being with a spiritual mission.
Well, if that doesn't set you back on your heels. That was awesome, Bob. I'm so glad you asked that question, Elizabeth. Thank you. Yeah, that was enormous. Please help me pronounce your names. Somava? Nope.
Hi, Bob. It's so nice to see you again. Aloha.
Oh, Selma, how are you doing? Your hair
I'm
got longer
well. Yes, my hair is longer.
than the last time I saw you. It's very good to see your smiling face.
It's wonderful to see you too. So I'm going to build right from the answer you were just giving, because that was what was in my heart. Because it seems to me that your whole talk, the thing that really filled me up today was just the storytelling of hope and the narrative of that this is a moment where that community building that each of us are doing in our neighborhoods, and that the society building that we're collectively doing together, that narrative is as important as all the stories of disintegration that we hear. So that's on the one hand. And then the other part,
I think it's more important, actually.
Yes, I agree. For us, I think that's actually what we need to do. And so one part of the question is, how can we all contribute toward that? And how can the stories that we're each hearing in our neighborhoods as Baha'is join with the stories of so many other communities in this moment? And then the other part of that is, I'm in this very privileged place where I often get to see the impact of that release of the trapped and untapped potential, as we hear what Indigenous women in New Zealand are discovering about how to build a restorative economy, or how Black farmers in Eastern North Carolina are thinking about how to shift and create a regional cooperative economy. How can, as people develop increasingly complex solutions, because we're living into the strength of our diversity, how can those solutions find way to one another so that we begin to build light upon light? And are there mechanisms that the Baha'i community is thinking of to make that possible?
Yeah, it is ironic and humbling that you're asking me a question, because I regard you, Shoma, as one of the wisest and smartest people I know, and certainly one of the sweetest. And so I'm going to answer your question with a story you told me. You told me about, I think it was Wake Forest University Hospital, where they were having overwhelming access to the emergency department by Black people in the neighborhood. And by the time they showed up, they were in bad shape. And it was a critical condition. It cost a ton of money. And all the things that they were complaining about were manageable conditions in most high blood pressure and diabetes and so forth. But because of their disenfranchisement from the hospital, they weren't able to access care and manage their conditions in ways that would stabilize their lives. And the thing that I loved about that story, which I think is in large part the answer to your question, is that they asked themselves, well, who lives in those neighborhoods? And it was Black employees at the hospital who might have been on the sanitation staff or in the custodial group or, whatever. And they gave these folks training and skills to go to their churches and to go to their neighborhoods and to go to community gatherings and social spaces and begin to start conversations about how you manage high blood pressure and how you manage diabetes and about smoking cessation and so on, and how that impacted the hospital system, saving it tens of millions of dollars, and how it impacted the population, decreasing emergency room use and increasing health markers. Now here's my point, and here's the thing that I want to drive. Everybody in our lives, we're all living transformational lives with stories great and small happening all around us. But sometimes we get so preoccupied that we don't think about, oh, wow, that was a moment in which that woman gained agency. That was a moment in which that man became a social influence to the betterment of his community. That was a moment in which their perception of themselves changed because they were empowered to do something greater than something they knew had to be done, but something they didn't feel they had access to do. And Shoma, what I wanted to suggest is those moments occur in all of our lives.
Yeah.
But they are largely overlooked because we pass them by. And what I'm suggesting is that we increase our sensitivity to those moments of magical inspiration and change that occur on a daily basis in virtually every one of our lives, and recognize what's actually happening. This is a moment of real connection. This is a moment of genuine happiness. This is a moment in which I see you and I appreciate who you are at a deeper level. These are the building blocks of social and spiritual transformation. And if you live that way, you can build an entirely new way of life, not just for you, but for your family and community. And I'll tell you how you know this is true. Everybody who engages in that behavior is special to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you stop and think about the people that you most admire, they're engaged in some of that behavior. And the irony is the behavior is free. We can all do it. And it always leads to wonderful transformation for you and for the person that you're engaged with. So it doesn't have to be on a big system, save millions of dollars and all that. I think this happens in everybody's life on a regular basis. And the question is, do we recognize it and do we embrace it? Because I think when we do, everybody gets better.
1000%. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Bob, we have 2 people in the chat. Sue? Welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Charlene. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Sue. You look great. How you doing?
So do you. I'm going in a slightly different direction, and I hope to make it not open up a can of worms or anything, but I loved everything that you had to say, and I'm so pumped with what's happening over not only in the United States, but around the world, the way that you've described it. There was one thing though, and this is where my little niche of work is right now, and that is focusing on people who are of African descent.
Mhm.
And also people who, now including people who are indigenous in our country.
Mhm.
And the need to focus on them specifically in space where it's only them, so that they have an opportunity to become aware of who they really are and to let go of some of the, what you talked about earlier, some of the things that they see that are not, that they don't need to be seeing anymore, that they need to be focusing on those kind of characteristics, gifts, spiritual gifts that have been given us, to be able to share with the larger community and to be able to be a part of the process of moving the American nation forward in what it's meant to do spiritually in the world. And I just wanted to see if you had anything to say about that, because it's a real need. And we find people, both Baha'i and otherwise, people who are in the faith but not active, people who are on the fringes, people who have left, say, I believe in Baha'u'llah, but it can no longer be there anymore, to help them to see, you gotta be, because if you're not here being at the center, doing what you're supposed to uniquely be doing, we're not gonna be able to do what we all need to be doing.
Right.
And so that's my focus of work.
Mhm.
And I wanted to see what your thoughts were about that fitting in with everything else that you shared tonight.
So I think this is a really important question, and it's something that deserves a lot of focus and a lot of careful thought and experience. Now, I'm going to start in an odd place, but that's just how my mind works. So you get the package. That's how this works. My wife and I raised 3 kids. Now they're all adults, and God bless them. I love them, and they're doing well, and this and that and the other. But as we were raising these kids, we had a thing that we used to say to each other all the time, and that is, we're not raising kids, we're raising adults. And so the issue was, we know they don't understand, we know that they're not fully capable, we know that they feel behind the 8 ball, sometimes disenfranchised or disempowered, sometimes unfairly treated, and this and that and the other. But the approach we're going to take with them is going to attempt to be empowering and educative, so that every challenge they face becomes a developmental experience from which they gain the very things they think they lack. And so that's kind of the view I have of development. Now, having said that, I want to say this, that if you look around American society, or if you look around the world, there's a whole lot of rehab that's going to have to get done with a lot of impacted populations. I mean, just think of what's happening to kids in Ukraine right now. And what's going to happen with, I know you know what alexithymia is, and how it inhabits kids in isolation, and particularly in war zones, and how it can completely warp their psychological and emotional development, and make them monsters. Now, interestingly, in those cases, the one proven cure to that kind of warped development is one caring adult. Somebody who's going to, one caring adult, somebody who's going to stick with you no matter what. Now, to your point, if you look on the Indian reservations, if you look in the inner city and in Black communities, if you look at lots of different impacted populations, there's a lot of rehab work that has to get done. And I think, to your point, some of that work is going to have to happen inside the group, with the group. I think that's that is a developmental stage. But I also think, and I know you agree with this, that the object is not to stay in the room, but to get ready to re-enter the larger environment, but feel good about who you are and what you have to contribute and your value. And so that's the dynamic balance that I think that we have to figure out, because on one hand, so many populations in the United States are impacted by incredible problems that are very difficult to understand and to deal with. And on the other hand, we're not raising kids, we're raising adults. So the object is to get bigger, to get smarter, to get stronger, to get more able. And managing that dynamic balance is really tough. This is not the stuff of those old tea groups that they had way back when everybody sits around talking about their feelings and so forth. And frankly, and I don't mean to be offensive here, I think that some of our language and conceptions stand in our way there. I mean, for example, I hear a lot of folks saying, you know, I don't feel safe, you triggered me, this and that and the other. And it's not that I'm suggesting that their issues are not legitimate. I believe that their issues are legitimate. But I am raising the question of how can we talk about this in a way that empowers us both to support you better and to make sure that the issues and sensitivities and understandings that trouble you are more effectively managed. But if the message I get is limited to you triggered me or I don't feel safe around you, that's not enough information for me to make an adjustment in my approach so that I can be more supportive of you. So now, bear in mind, I'm not trying to put anybody down for employing, I've just used these as examples of ways in which we need to refine our discourse so that we can help each other in ways that are more effective. Because at the end of the day, I got to go to work, I got to have a job, I got to pay my bills, I got to do all kinds of things. What kind of environment can we create that is going to support my ability to engage my life in a way that is productive and I feel good about? And I think we're in the middle of that. And I think we're learning a lot, but I think we have a lot yet to learn about how to do that well. So I hope that made sense in terms of a response to your, but that's kind of my intuitive reaction.
No, it's absolutely
to the
correct.
challenge.
If I can just say just briefly back in response and support of everything that you said, in our book 8 that we have, I'm co-tutoring it with an auxiliary board member who is Black in our area. And in our last meeting, we're on book 3 now, unit 3, almost finished. And we are always going to those things that we need to get better at internally, get rid of emotionally and so on. And so this time we talked about, why don't we make a list of the things that we have learned and of the things that we can now bring back to, because we can't stay here like this.
Right, exactly.
And we came back to a larger
as comfortable group, and loving as it is.
As comfortable and loving as it is, to go back to now a mixed group and bring something to that group that makes us feel good, so that they can feel good too when they experience it. Yeah. So yes, totally in line.
So I want to make one other point, because it's the other side of what my wife and I talked about when our kids were little. You know that one of the Baha'i teachings is that we should accustom our kids to hardship, because life is tough. And in fact, the way that Abdu'l-Baha describes happiness, he says that the happiness and greatness, the wealth and station of a human being is not conditioned on material wealth or social stature. It is conditioned on the extent of knowledge, the scope of knowledge, the refinement of character, and the ability to solve difficult problems. So, I think that one of the things that we've got to figure out is how to make it okay for things to be hard. And how to understand that if you decide to embrace that, there is a spiritual benefit of empowerment and upliftment that you can expect to occur, because you're engaging the very struggle that God put you on this earth to deal with. And so a lot of what I'm saying in response to your point is that there is an expansion of that conversation that could occur to the benefit of all of its participants. And that sometimes I know a woman who had a horrible life for 25 years. And I look at her now, and you can't see any trace of that life in her. You would think that she was born of privilege and had a great life and was, and I mean, if you look deep, you wouldn't find it. And so I asked her, I said, how did you do this? Because I know that you struggled with drugs for a long time. And I know what that led you to from a lifestyle standpoint. And I know how it destroyed you and everybody around you. How did you exercise those demons, which people find so difficult to escape from? And she said, I did 3 things. She said, I got positive, I got busy, and I got prayerful. And those are the only 3 things I did. I started looking at things differently and forcing myself to find the good in whatever difficulty I was feeling or encountering. I got busy with service and busy with work, and I got busy with prayer all the time. And over the years that have followed, she's one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life.
Thank you, Bob.
Well,
Wow.
Sherilyn, by way of thanks to you and apologies, you asked me to do this a long time ago, and stuff kept coming up, and things happened that we didn't anticipate, and so forth. And in fact, this is one of those cases where
I know
you can't imagine what I thought when I realized the NSA had to change its schedule, and in the meeting, I said, well, yeah, you know, that day's okay. And then I looked at it and I thought, oh my God. And I told the friends, I said, I cannot call this woman again and tell her that something happened. But it's just a joy to be with you and to be with all your friends.
Thank you.
And to have a chance to talk about these things that we all care about. And you can tell, Sherilyn, I don't care at all. You know, there's no sense of urgency in my heart about any of this. No, these are the things that really drive us from day to day, and the things that we want to spend our time on earth pursuing. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to stumble my way through some of the things that I think are important.
Well, thank you for not rescheduling again. But you know, everything works out when it's supposed to. And you know, when you're as busy in service as you are, we just greatly appreciate you being here. And this truly was very uplifting. You know, many people have commented on that. And yeah, it was just so refreshing. So we thank you, and we thank the other members of the National Spiritual Assembly for doing without you for a little while this evening. We greatly appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And I hope to see everybody. You know, the virtual reality has been our saving grace for a while, but I'd like to see people. Actual human beings in fact, I ran into Shoma in the airport. Where was it, Shoma? In Chicago? And
yes,
we were in that you know, the TSA line where they check you. And Karen, and
such a joy.
I just turned around and there she was. And it took me a minute to focus in, and because you know how you are in an airport, your brain is going someplace else. And it was just so wonderful to see a dear friend that I haven't seen because we haven't seen anybody in a while.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, Sherilyn,
know-
thank you so much for inviting me. And
Thank you. Do you have 2 more minutes?
sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, because I see we have a friend on the phone who raised her hand. So, Sarai, can you come off mute?
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that.
There you
And what a
go.
wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Well, my husband is in prison. He is a Baha'i, and he's plagued with mental health issues and addiction. And I heard a long time ago that there were actually groups for Baha'is, something like, support groups. And I'm wondering if you have any knowledge of anything like that existing, sir?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, now I can't give you all the details now because it's not top of
Right.
mind for me. But you can write the Baha'i National Center and just send them an email and they can give you specific information about that. And what I would say to you is this: the aim of the Baha'i Faith is to embrace everybody, no matter what their situation is, no matter what mistakes they might have made. That's not the issue. The issue is for us to be in loving support and encouragement to each other and help us all, in each of us, get better.
Mhm.
So our hearts are with you, our prayers are with you, but I want you to reach out to the Baha'i National Center. They will have some information for you, and you can take that and do what you can.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Sarai, before you go, in the chat, you're getting a lot of support from the friends here who can relate to your struggles. And one of the programs is called Bahá'ís in Recovery Fellowship.
That's right. That's right. But I
Is that the
don't
one?
remember their email address or any of those things.
Right.
But you can get all that from the Baha'i National
Mhm.
Center.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Sarai. Thank you. Our prayers
Thank you
and
for your
thoughts are with
question, and
you.
our prayers are with you.
Mhm.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Well, friends, we're going to close now, and thank you all for being here. We're going to do our best to get this recording up within the week because we know many of us, myself included, want to hear it all over again for all the little fine points that we may have missed when we were busy jotting notes. So thank you again, Bob. And yeah, just with much gratitude. Thank you so much for coming and being here with us. The timing was right.
Thank you very much for asking me.
Yes, thank you. Good night, friends. We love you.
Bye-bye.
See you next month.
Oh,
Bye-bye.